My name is Harvey L McCormick. Three of my brothers were in World War II. That was Maurice, Henry, and Claude. Claude McCormick was in the Battle of the Bulge for 6 days, and he was lucky enough to survive. After having graduated from high school in Texas, I attended Texas College for several years until I was, in fact, I had a deferment. At that time, they had a draft. But when Pearl Harbor broke out, when the war broke out on December 7, 1941, they canceled all of the deferments. And of course, I had to report immediately to the Army. My first station was Fort Walters, Texas, out from Fort Worth, Texas. My second assignment was Fort Leavenworth, Missouri. My third one was an air base in Meridian, Mississippi. And after that, I was assigned to the Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. I was a private, of course. I went in as a private. I eventually got promoted when I got to South Carolina. Kind of a dark side of my military career. They shipped a cadre of us from Eglin Field, Florida to Greenville, South Carolina Air Force Base. And at that time I was a private, and there were several non-commissioned officers there, sergeants, buck sergeants, staff sergeants, and master sergeants. They got into a ruckus in Atlanta and trying to desegregate the restaurant, and they were thrown in the guardhouse together with myself. And eventually they sent us to South Carolina. They busted these sergeants, reduced in rank, as they say. But they couldn't bust me because I was just a private. But eventually, I stayed there a little while, and I got promoted to sergeant. I was a supply sergeant, which, of course, as the name implies, you're responsible for getting the supplies, especially clothing and other equipment. Some of these units had a lot of heavy equipment. I had nothing to do with the weapons. That's the ordnance. They dealt with that. No, this was in Greenville, South Carolina. Then I was shipped briefly to Belvoir, Virginia, which is outside of Washington. Then I was shipped to Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, which is outside of St. Louis. Then from there I was shipped to Truexfield, Wisconsin, which is outside of Madison, Wisconsin. And there I took the test for officer candidate school, and I was accepted, and they sent me from Wisconsin to Miami Beach, Florida in November of 1943. The stay in Miami was in itself very eventful. We stayed in, as a matter of fact, we stayed in Miami Beach as opposed to Miami. And the Air Force had taken over a lot of hotels there because there weren't too many tourists coming there. They were scared of the Germans. The German U-boats were putting these saboteurs off, and that cut down on the situation. But the Air Force took the hotels, and they put us in the hotels, and they trained us on golf courses and every other places. Well, I brought up in Texas, and I was thoroughly familiar with racism, and nobody had to give me a lesson of any sort. There were one or two incidents in Miami, I'm not going to mention the other ones, that was racially motivated, shall we say. Of course, there were about 24 African Americans candidates there. The rest of them were white. And of course, we could not attend the nightclubs in Miami, which there were awful lot of them. And you didn't have too much time in all the candidates. But on a Saturday night, they give you what they call open post. That means they gave you a pass for us for 4 hours. But if we got the pass, the only thing we could do is go down on Collins Avenue and order some fruit, sit in the back of our parents or something like that. We couldn't go in the nightclub. The white boys went in there and they waived the cover charges for them. So I wasn't shocked, shall we say. I didn't like it. But something happened to me in Miami that I thought was clearly racially motivated. When I got to office candidate school, I'd been in the Army for about 2 years. And I had made it a point to study the different drill formations, and they have quite a few books that you read upon. So I was pretty good with respect to close order drill. And therefore, they were marching through Miami on Collins Avenue out to the golf course. They do that Saturday and Sunday. And I was on the guard-on. The guard-on is the right foremost person in a formation. And all the rest of the soldiers have to home in on him. And I thought I was doing a pretty good job. And the band was playing and all that kind of stuff. And they stopped us in the middle of the street. And the captain came back to me, and he pulled me off the ring and put me inside. Then they continued on to the barracks. And when they got there, they just dismissed us. And he called me aside and said, "I guess you wonder what happened." I said, "Well, I would like to know, Captain." So he said, "Well, the colonel ordered me to move you from out there." And he said, "I think this guy was from Maine or someplace now." But they quit that practice when they pulled a Jewish boy off the front. And Walter Winchell, who was a big newscaster at that time, and the Jews raised a lot of sand, so they stopped the practice. But beyond that, I didn't. I just got through. When I graduated, they give you a $250 uniform allowance. And I went down to the quartermaster and got a GI uniform. You had to get a standard uniform. Then that's when they shipped me off to Tuskegee. About 10 or 15 years ago, we have a chapter, Tuskegee Airmen, in Kansas City. And they sent me to the Air Force Academy. That's in, where is that? Boulder, not in Boulder, Colorado. I forget if it was in Colorado. About 100 miles from Denver, as I recall. So I went out there to represent, they were going to dedicate a statue to the Tuskegee Airmen. I went out there and I ran into a black guy who was working out the Pentagon on the same project. And late at night, after they had dismissed him and everything, we had a bull session. I don't know if you know what a bull session is. Well, that's just an informal meeting with not only the blacks, but the Hispanic and Asian cadets at the Air Force. And they were complaining right and left about the treatment they were receiving. But you never know it by reading the press release and everything. But as I understand, the Air Force have a very low rate of qualifying black pilots now in relationship to the population. So now, as far as the racism is concerned, when I got to Tuskegee, they had 4 different types of eating places. They had one for white officers, one for black officers, one and the black enlisted man. And that was burnt hamburgers, things of that sort. But I was in the meeting when Colonel Parrish read Roosevelt issued the edict, executive order, I guess you call it, which he desegregated all of the theaters, restaurants, eating places. And they announced that it was an officer's call, which means the officers you're supposed to get a certain place at a certain time. And the only place with holes was the chapel. So Colonel Parrish, the commander, he was a white guy, he walked in there and he just simply read Roosevelt's executive order. And he said, "These things going to be integrated." And as he walked out of the chapel, he hesitated a little bit. And some of the white officers said they were going to before they would eat with, I don't want to use the word here, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Before they do it, they would volunteer for the Eastern Front, the Western Front, rather. Now, the Western Front was pretty hot at that time. They were fighting the Germans tooth and nail. And Colonel Parrish said, "If anybody wants to transfer, I'll work late at night." And he walked out. And some of those white officers were so upset, so they asked for a transfer. Which, if you asked for a transfer at that time, they would more than likely going to send you to the Western Front, Eastern Front. And so that was the end of that. These were World War I guys. They built a hospital mainly for African Americans after World War, because they wouldn't let them into many of these hospitals throughout the country. And they built it at Tuskegee. And a lot of them went there for treatment, and they decided they would experiment on it, which they did. A good friend of mine, a lawyer, what's his name? Fred Gray. He had the lawsuit against the Veterans Administration. I forget how many $1 million he got out of it. He got a lot of money out of it. But they are entirely different. They were in a different time frame from where we are. We were, this thing at Tuskegee was called an experiment because they didn't think the blacks could fly airplanes, period. Matter of fact, they thought the Japanese had a lot of trouble. Until after Pearl Harbor, they decided the Japanese were pretty good pilots. And, and so that's the reason they call it the Tuskegee experiment. And then, of course, you probably read about Eleanor Roosevelt's episode down there. Well, they were arguing about whether or not they were going to get... The Air Force was being sued because they weren't admitting African Americans. Roosevelt was vacillating. Mrs. Roosevelt went to Tuskegee and asked to be taken up in an airplane. The white officer said he gave her a white pilot to take her. Eleanor Roosevelt said, I don't want a white pilot. I want to see one of these black pilots accomplishing. Right. So they had to take it and it flew all over the country. And Roosevelt said, well, by that time Roosevelt had decided he would build an Air Force base down there anyway, at Tuskegee. The picture there is Alexander Jefferson. He now lives in Detroit. He was shot down on his 25th mission and captured by the Germans. The Germans shot down and captured 32 of the black pilots. And Jefferson happened to want to talk to another one. I think he was Surratt from Baltimore. And I met another guy from Birmingham. He was severely wounded when he was shot down, but the Germans had to patch him, they give him blood transfusion and all that kind of stuff. And he's still around, and they must have done a pretty good job. Kept as a POW for 9 months. At the end of the war, he was liberated, and when he came back, they put him in a room with me. We had little adjoining rooms, and also in the BOQ. He had the outer room because he outranked me. They go by rank in the military, everything. And I got a chance to talk to him quite a bit at night as to what happened to him when he was shot down. But many years, 56 years later, I ran into him in, they had a meeting in Las Vegas. and I didn't know what he looked like too much. So I saw some guys from Detroit. I said, you guys, do you know Alexander Jefferson? He said, man, he's sitting over there. But he was talking to somebody else at the time. After he got free, I took him aside. I said, you probably don't remember me. You came in the middle of the night into the room at Tuskegee. He's a nice sport about it. So we had a talk. So I met him in Omaha. We took that we had to take that picture together. At any rate, this racial thing was festering, at least since World War I. The Germans, they had some blacks fighting with the French in World War I. The Germans dropped leaflets on them trying to get them to surrender and offered them citizenship in Germany. To the blacks now. Now, 1936, you probably read about Jesse Owens' episode, whether Hitler snubbed him or not. Well, Jesse Owens, when his life said he didn't feel that Hitler did snub. He's the only guy there. But in any case, leading with World War II, they were beating up on the Germans big time for being racist. And of course, when they shot these pilots down, captured them, Jefferson said they finally they locked him up for a while, but they finally brought him before a German captain who spoke good English. By the way, they had an awful lot of officers in the German army who used to live in the United States, and therefore they spoke good English. And so the German captain told him that we have some pretty good intelligence. We know what grades you guys made at Tuskegee. We know what kind of airplanes you're flying. We know what ships you came over when you got here. And we know, and by the way, your baby sister graduated from high school the other day. So Jefferson said, well, we know you did not get beaten up and get shot. You were ahead. So nice conversation. He said Jefferson almost got killed by the American bombers because they were bombing the Germans. They almost killed the Americans because the German guards were guarding them. And they're going to kill all of them, the Americans and the Germans. But he got on, they were in a forced march for 70 miles. And he said some of these guards were very old men, and they kept having heart attacks. And they're the German guards. And I tell Anita all the time, I said, you old-fashioned about these women fighting in the army. I said, well, I said, you get on the 70-mile forced march.